I am asking now Prime Minister Netanyahu, elected now for the 6th time, day one of your 6th term as Prime Minister, what do you need to accomplish for the future of Israel and on behalf of the state?
Well, the first three things are easy. Block Iran, block Iran, block Iran. To survive here, you have to be strong. The strong survive. The weak don't, they perish. The strong are the ones that people make peace with. You don't make peace with the weak, you make peace with the strong.
Born to a generation of Holocaust survivors during the infancy of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, or Bibi as he is more affectionately known, was raised in a home of significant faith and family. Hope was the hallmark of his childhood. Hope that loved ones lost in the genocide would not be forgotten. Hope that victims would be blessed with new beginnings. And hope that the rebirth of the Jewish nation would succeed.
You get peace through strength.
Yeah.
And because Israel is becoming so strong, you could get the Arab countries to come. And this is the story of Israel. I think it's a parable, as I say, the parable of hope.
Beautiful.
It's a parable of hope, you know?
But in 1967, just a few months before his 18th birthday, that hope was threatened. Throw the Jews into the sea. That was the command barked by Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser to Arab forces. Once again, the Jewish people were the target of annihilation. But what ensued was the Six-Day War, which proved Israel to be a formidable military power and forever changed the political, social, and spiritual landscape of the Middle East. The event also solidified Bibi's future as a tireless defender against radical terrorism. Following in the footsteps of his older, beloved brother Yoni, Bibi joined the Israel Defense Forces and served as a captain with the Elite Special Forces Unit, Sayeret Matkal. Both Bibi and Yoni dedicated their lives to rescuing and protecting the vulnerable. For them, it wasn't just missions, it was their purpose. A calling that sadly cost Yoni his life in 1976. Devastated but undaunted, Bibi strengthened in his resolve, his objective, justice, his focus, politics.
You changed the economic policies. Would you agree with my statement that Israel was basically a socialist economy?
Largely.
Socialist,
Largely. This is the one place where I did borrow something from Clinton, where he said, don't let a good crisis go to waste. Never waste a good crisis. Well, we had a great economic crisis, and I put in dozens of free market reforms, dozens.
In time, the Special Forces commander turned worldwide diplomat. First, he was elected to the Knesset in 1988. Then, 8 years later, at the age of 46, he made a major leap, ascending to the office of Prime Minister, serving as Israel's 13th and 17th Prime Minister. In this role, Bibi led his home country into an era of peace and discovery. He orchestrated economical as well as technological advances, and initiated effective, peaceful foreign relations across the globe. Because of his stewardship, Israel is now an impressive industrial worldwide leader. So it's no wonder that Bibi holds the title as Israel's longest-serving leader. Among his countrymen and before the world, Benjamin Netanyahu is evidence that true leaders still exist.
Tel Aviv, Benjamin Netanyahu. Start with Zionism in general. Where does it begin in your mind?
Where does it begin?
Yeah.
It begins with Abraham.
Love that.
He goes from the land of Ur, which is somewhere in Iraq, to the Holy Land about 3,500 years ago.
Yeah.
About 1,500 years later, King David sets up the kingdom of Israel. Before that, the children of Abraham go to Egypt. There's a drought in the land. They have to eat. Well, they go down there. Their brother, whom they sold into slavery, is the number 2, the deputy of the Pharaoh. He reveals himself to them in one of the most poignant chapters in the Bible. I don't know if you read the story of Joseph and his brothers.
One or two times.
I think it's one of the most moving human stories, just so raw, emotional. When he reveals himself to them, and they come to Egypt, they stay there for a few hundred years, become slaves. Moses takes them out, brings them to the Holy Land. Joshua doesn't enter the Holy Land. Joshua conquers the land. But the tribes of Israel are not united. Finally, they choose King Saul. He's beaten by the Philistines, who are not Palestinians. They're a Greek seafaring people on the coast. And they choose a new king, David, who establishes the kingdom of Israel. And it's united for 80 years. Then it splits to the kingdom of Judea and the kingdom of Samaria. Samaria taken out by our exile to the far corners of the earth. That's the 10 tribes of Israel. We don't know where they went. And the 2 tribes, Judah and Benjamin, remain in Judea. Jerusalem is their capital. And we remained there for a very long time until through successive conquests we're kicked out. But during that time we built, David's son Solomon builds the first temple, and after it's destroyed by the Babylonians, it's rebuilt again, the second temple, which is where Jesus overturned the money tables.
Yep.
Right? And that's destroyed by the Romans, and we're still there. We're still holding on to our land, to our cherished homeland.
Your story that you just told is improbable, statistically impossible.
Yeah, well,
How do you explain that?
Faith, great belief in our destiny. Even though we were dispersed after the Roman destruction of the temple and Jerusalem, we still clung to our land. Really dispersed only in the 7th to 9th centuries, when the last invader, the Arab conquerors, basically made it impossible for the Jewish farmer to live on his land. So, the Arabs always say the Jews were the colonists. No, the Arabs were the colonists. They kicked out the Jews, but it didn't do anything with the land. It became barren. And successive generations of Jews for over 1,000 years. Next year in Jerusalem, you could have been some Jewish ghetto in medieval Europe, and people were praying next year in Jerusalem, or in Yemen, or in Morocco, or in Iraq, the modern incarnation of Babylon, next year in Jerusalem. And finally, it took this prophet, a modern Moses, whose name is Theodor Herzl. He was a Jew who grew up, who was born in Hungary, and became a journalist, and he could see the fires of anti-Semitism beginning to rise in Europe. And he said there's only one solution for the Jewish people. It's to act on the biblical prophecy of the ingathering of the exile, and to reestablish their independent state in their ancient homeland. And that's the movement he began at the end of the 19th century, which is called Zionism, for Mount Zion in the heart of Jerusalem. And there we accomplished it. So my father's generation was tasked with rebuilding the Jewish state. Yeah. My generation was tasked with protecting it and ensuring that it has a prosperous and secure future.
How did your father describe his ultimate meetings at the highest level of U.S. politics?
My father was born in 1910, and he was, how shall I say this, precociously wise. When he was 23, in 1933, right when Hitler arose, he said that the scourge of Nazi racism was aimed, first of all, at the destruction of the entire Jewish people. He was perhaps the first, or among the first, to see that, what many refused to see. And second, he said that Hitlerism would threaten the entire world, and that our task, he said, was to alert the nations of the world to the danger of Hitler, and explain to them that it's not only the Jewish people who would be in danger, but all the nations would be in danger. That's not bad in 1933 for a 23-year-old. But he couldn't make that much traction. The one who understood that you have to open the gates of the Holy Land, otherwise the Jews would be trapped in this Nazi inferno, which they were. And so there was a battle to open up the gates of the land of Israel, which was controlled at that time by the British Empire. And they were afraid of the Arabs, so they wouldn't open it up. The one man who fought to open it up was a man called Zev Jabotinsky, who was the founder of this movement. We're in the headquarters of the Likud movement, which was really founded by Jabotinsky a long time ago. Jabotinsky said, look, there is this Holocaust that's coming. And unless we bust open the gates of what is now Israel and get the Jews out, they'll all be destroyed. And he couldn't make any headway. He was in London trying to do this. And my father came to him in 1939 and he said, you have the right idea, but you're in the wrong place. And Jabotinsky was 60, he was a brilliant man. And here comes this 29-year-old kid. And he said, why do you say that? And he said, because the rising power in the world is America. And if you persuade America, then they will force Britain to change their policy. And so Jabotinsky called all his staff in and he said, you hear this guy, Netanyahu? He's right. We're moving. And they went to New York and began to agitate for a Jewish state there.
Beautiful. Wow.
That's at the start of World War II. Guess who? Well, Jabotinsky died shortly after they came there. And so my father really had to work on his own. And he started agitating for a Jewish state, both in public meetings and in meetings with officials. And first he went to the lowly officials, in the State Department, and they were all Arabists and they were anti-Zionists. They didn't want to upset the Arabs. But what they heard from my father was too important to just sweep under the rug. So he kept bringing him higher and higher to higher officials. And finally he got to Eisenhower, who was the head of the army after the victory of World War II. And Eisenhower said, why should we support you? And he said, because you're going to end up in a battle now over control of the Middle East, and the Soviets are going to move in, and the Arabs will be like putty in their hands. We will be Israel, this land, this state that we want to establish, will be the bastion of Western values in the heart of the Middle East. He said, but you're only 600,000 people. That's what we were at the time, 1947. How will you hold out? And he said, we'll be the strongest army in the Middle East. And Eisenhower said to my father, how's that possible? He said, my father said to Eisenhower, General, you've just seen in 2 world wars how we Jews fight for others. Can you imagine how strong we'll be when we fight for ourselves, for our homeland, for our history, and for our future? So Eisenhower was impressed, and he brought the general staff of the United States to hear him, and he wanted a 3rd meeting too. My father worked on public opinion and the opinion of leaders for Zionism, and then the state was established, and he withdrew from public life. And he was a historian, so that's what he did. But he taught me that you have to appeal to public opinion, and you have to appeal to the leaders. To public opinion, you appeal on the basis of justice. To leaders, you appeal on the basis of interest. In the case of Israel, justice and interest collided, because it's just that the Jewish people who were dispersed for so many centuries would reassemble in their ancient homeland, just as the prophets prophesied. But it's also in the interest of the United States, as it turned out, a mighty interest to have a powerful ally representing our common interests and our common heritage in the heart of the Middle East. And this I gained all from my father. Remember, for 19 years between the establishment of Israel in 1948 and 1967, the Arabs openly said, we're going to destroy you. We're just going to wipe you off the map. After our great victory in 1967 in the Six-Day War, we pushed Israel's borders from the outskirts of Tel Aviv across a big mountain, the mountains of Judea and Samaria, to the banks of the Jordan. Now, you couldn't just conquer us. It was impossible. So the Arab propaganda in those years devised a new theory. It said, first you have to get Israel to withdraw to indefensible lines, and once it couldn't protect itself, then we'll make peace with you. And they called it territory for peace. We would be completely helpless. Arab countries, and the Palestinians especially, unreconciled to Israel's existence, would pocket the territories and then destroy us from indefensible lines.
Former Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Bibi Netanyahu, who is one of today's monumental leaders, takes us on an extraordinary journey in his memoir of purpose, destiny, history, and family. Explore the landscape of Benjamin's life and legacy, from a child, son, brother, soldier, and commander, to an astounding political figure with a mission to protect, unite, and bring liberty and justice to Israel and nations around the world. Netanyahu takes a personal, dramatic, riveting, and detailed account of his life and aspirations. He shares testimonies about his strong Zionist family upbringing, alongside stories of his close-knit brothers Yoni and Edo. He recounts his negotiations and relationships with presidents of our modern history in an eye-opening, heartfelt expression of truth and passion. The memoir of this insightful, formidable leader of our time will stand as an inspiring, defining testament of courage, conviction, and strength. This is Bibi, My Story. Call or go online to get your copy today.
We're here in Tel Aviv. Bibi Netanyahu is my guest. I say Bibi because I'm reading this new story, your novel, your autobiography is coming out. We're talking about it, we're unpacking it, and it's simply entitled My Story. When I say to you, the saints and the sinners, what am I saying when I say the saints and the sinners?
Well, that was a sort of a joke that I used to say. I said, Jerusalem is for the saints, Tel Aviv is the sinners, but people travel back and forth, so you can be both.
Yeah.
Tel Aviv is a magnificent international city now. Jerusalem was the spiritual center of our people from the time of King David. That's 3,000 years ago. So nothing compares with the emotional impact of Jerusalem. I wasn't born in Jerusalem. I was born in Tel Aviv, but on day 2, my mother brought me to Jerusalem, so I grew up there. And I have a special affinity to all the things that Jerusalem represents when you look at it. You look at the Temple Mount, you look at the Western Wall, which was the rampart that Herod built to support the Jewish temple. It's so magnificent. It's just deeply moving. It gets you what I call the Rock of Ages.
I'm not a historian, but I do know a little bit about the fact that you changed the economic policies. If we take 1948, move forward a couple of decades, would you agree with my statement that Israel was basically a socialist economy?
Largely.
Socialist,
Largely. It
largely.
was a socialist, semi-socialist economy. And I thought that, that it couldn't really survive if it maintained a socialist economic system. And there's a very simple reason for that. To survive here, you have to be strong. The strong survive. The weak don't, they perish. The strong are the ones that people make peace with. You don't make peace with the weak, you make peace with the strong. So if we wanted both to survive and thrive and make peace with our neighbors, we'd have to be strong, very strong. And I had a view of how to make Israel strong, which was very different from most of my colleagues in Israel's political world. My view was that the only way to make it strong was to shift it from a socialist economy to a free market economy.
There you go. Wow.
And that was very difficult to accomplish. I did that both as prime minister when I was elected first time in '96, and then when I became finance minister in 2003, in the midst of a great economic crisis. This is the one place where I did borrow something from Clinton, where he said, "Don't let a good crisis go to waste. Never waste a good crisis." Well, we had a great economic crisis, and I put in dozens of free market reforms, dozens. They catapulted Israel's economy because there's so much genius here, so much innovation, so much creativity. But it doesn't help if you have to pay a 65% marginal tax. Everybody leaves. All the creative people go to Palo Alto. Now Palo Alto is coming here.
Yeah.
Now everybody is coming here because we've liberated the economy, and you can see that in the skyline of Tel Aviv. You can take a photo of it when you leave. We had one high-rise building in Tel Aviv when I came here first as prime minister. It was in the south, and another, the stock exchange, here in the north. Now there's a forest of skyscrapers, and that reflects the rise of Israel's economy, whose GDP per capita, because of these free market reforms, exceeded Japan's,
Wow.
France, Britain, and a few months ago, Germany.
My goodness.
So, it's just going up. But the interesting thing is, we also have the second largest concentration of billionaires per capita in the world. Number one was Hong Kong. I don't think that's going to last very long. So Israel went from being a socialist economy to one of the most robust, innovative, high-tech economies, but it had to go through free markets, because without that, it doesn't happen. And the other interesting thing is that inequality, you'd think inequality would go up. The rich get richer, the poor get poorer. No, not in Israel. The poor got richer, faster than the rich got rich, because we brought inequality down to its lowest level in 20 years. How did that happen? Because I encourage people to leave welfare and go to work. And guess what? When they work in a thriving economy, they earn a lot more than they'd get from their welfare checks.
Right.
So we actually brought down inequality and brought up personal income, and we're one of the few countries in the world to have that happen.
Your financial reforms that in essence created an environment for international investment, for these types of things. Our organization, Trinity Broadcasting, is building a 300-room hotel in the Galilee.
Good for you.
Right up at Capernaum. Mm-hmm. It was a project that you actually...
I launched, I remember.
You pitched it to my father.
Right.
And it bounced around with
actually, I remember it.
Okay.
So, well, because I thought that you should have the ability to fly in your constituents and your viewers to Israel, go directly to the Sea of Galilee. Capernaum is where Jesus preached for 3 years. 3 years. You see there the synagogue in which he preached. That's the actual synagogue. You're not saying, well, sort of, he was roughly here. No, he was on that spot.
Yes.
Exactly on that spot. And it's it's a scene of one of the greatest spiritual adventures of humanity. It's an extraordinary place on the Sea of Galilee. I didn't enjoy that much support when I took over, and the Israeli press, I'm talking from the Israeli press, it's largely left-leaning. And my evangelical friends used to joke that the press is so bad that here's what happened when I went to the Sea of Galilee. I actually took my 2 little boys with my wife, Sarah, to spend a weekend on the Sea of Galilee. And I waded into the water with them, and guess what happened? Netanyahu walked on water. And the next day, the Israeli press, so say my evangelical friends, covered this singular event with banner headlines: Netanyahu can't swim. So we didn't have such good press, but we turned the country around, made it a very strong country. And the reason I said that we had to turn it to free markets, we had to, because we needed the robust economy to finance our military needs against the new power that sought to wipe the Jews off the face of the earth, and that power is Iran. Yeah. So I've devoted my time, and I describe this in the book at length, how I had to shift the common narrative that said, oh, you've got to have peace with the Palestinians, that's the only way you'll get peace with the Arab world, and that's the only way you'll be able to fight Iran. And I said, no, you're not going to get peace with the Palestinians because the Palestinians don't want peace. They don't want a state next to Israel. They want a state instead of Israel. So if you keep waiting for them, we'll wait and wait and wait. And in fact, that's what we were doing. For 25 years, a quarter of a century, we were waiting for the Palestinians who wanted to destroy us to agree that they would have peace with us, or that we would have peace with the Arab countries. I said, peace does not go through the Palestinians. It goes around the Palestinians. And I couldn't persuade successive American presidents, Clinton, Obama, and initially even Trump, that we had here
a new path.
New path, because Israel was so strong now, economically, technologically, militarily, in terms of intelligence, that the Arab countries realized that to protect themselves against Iran, they needed a partnership with Israel. And that we could have a double whammy. We could both confront Iran or roll back Iran and have peace with Arab states. Couldn't get that through with Clinton, couldn't get it through with Obama for sure, okay? As he wanted a pact with Iran. But I did try to get it with President Trump.
Yeah.
And on my first meeting with him in Washington, I described this in the book, I said, Mr. President, Donald, you should take now an aircraft carrier to the Red Sea, and you should invite the leaders of Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, obviously President Sisi of Egypt and King Hussein of Jordan, but others. I'm telling you, there are 4 peace treaties waiting to be had, to be plucked like a ripe plum. And invite me, and we'll have a shipboard meeting to discuss a common security strategy against Iran. But I'm telling you, it will produce 4 peace treaties like that. Well, it took him took a while, a few years, actually towards the last year of his presidency, to realize that the Palestinian route is not going to go anywhere for the reasons I described. But this is going to go. And so we ended up, in a matter of a few weeks, signing 4 peace agreements and normalization agreements with 4 Arab countries. 4 Arab countries: United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan. Okay? So we did in a few weeks what it took a quarter of a century. We couldn't get anywhere because it was a different direction. And my thesis was very simple. You don't get peace from giving up vital territories that are the heart of your homeland. You get peace through strength.
Yeah.
And because Israel is becoming so strong, you could get the Arab countries to come, and they did. That began to change the history of the Middle East, but it also enabled us to focus my attention at least, at blocking Iran's nuclear program, which we did. I don't describe everything that we did. I describe some of the things that we did to hold back Iran, which is still an ongoing challenge.
Last time we actually physically saw each other, we were in Jerusalem at the TBN studios, and you were being interviewed by David Friedman on a series of documentaries that he and I executive produced on the Abraham Accords. And we interviewed, in essence, every player that was really the main, strategic piece. And it felt like what I learned as a non-political person is that the world had been trying to gain peace for 30 years, and we're crashing into the same brick wall. Yeah. And at some point, you informed us we could simply step around the wall, and it was like, what in the world? I mean, it was really a monumental time for the Middle East.
Distinguished guests, Air Force One has just landed in Israel.
This was a historic flight.
You just flew from Riyadh to Tel Aviv. I hope that one day an Israeli prime minister will be able to fly from Tel Aviv to Riyadh.
Israel is a global technological power. It is the second great center of innovation after Silicon Valley. And if you think about the traditional Arab boycott of Israel, which has been going on for decades, it made as much sense as Oregon, Nevada, Utah, Wyoming, Arizona, New Mexico, and half of Southern California boycotting Silicon Valley. So to the extent that you have leaders in the Arab world who are thinking about the security of their country, the prosperity of their country, a partnership with Israel is critical. And for them to make a political move in order to surface a relationship that was beginning underneath the surface is very hard. And here's the role of the administration comes in and really makes a dramatic change.
People were going down the rabbit hole of Palestinian narrative, and they bought, they bought the lie. The Palestinians just want to make peace with us and, just move the border right to the outskirts of Tel Aviv, shut your eyes and hope for the best. And, been there, done that. We gave up Gaza, and, the Islamists move in and they rocket Israel with thousands of rockets. We went out of Lebanon, and the Islamists called Hezbollah came in and they fire thousands of rockets. Now they say, make your country 10 miles wide, give them the hills above Tel Aviv and around Jerusalem, and hope for the best. We don't do that. I think we've shifted the view, but we have now a common challenge and a common opportunity. And I talk about that at great length in the book. I think we have to at once stop Iran's nuclear program, and at the same time expand the peace and expand the unbelievable technological potential to better the lives of not only the people of Israel, we're doing that already, but of people in the Middle East and the world. I think they're related, because you don't want Iran to have nuclear weapons. You don't want Iran to have nuclear weapons because Iran says you're the great Satan and we're just the little Satan in their way to get you.
Yeah.
And if Iran develops ballistic missiles, they could reach any American city with nuclear-tipped warheads. Do you want that? No, I don't think you do. So when we are fighting, and when I've been leading the fight against the nuclearization of Iran, I'm doing it obviously to protect the future of my country, and not to allow these Ayatollahs to end this extraordinary journey of my people for the last 4,000 years. But it's also to protect our common civilization against a credible threat. That's task number one. Task number two is the future is here, we're holding it. There is so much genius, so much brilliance in Israel, in life sciences, in digital developments, in agriculture, in crazy things that are unimaginable, that make life better, make life longer, cleaner, healthier, that we can partake with all our neighbors and with the entire world. And this is the story of Israel. I think it's a parable, as I see it, a parable of hope.
Beautiful.
It's a parable of hope, because if the people, the Jewish people who were battered, massacred, exiled, decimated, can come back to life, ingather the exiles in our ancient homeland, reconstitute our capital, Jerusalem, that means that if we can overcome hopeless odds, this means that there is hope for everyone in the world. And I think that's what Israel truly represents. It represents the triumph of faith and hope over despair and hopelessness. Truly felt the pulse of history. And I remember the long road that Israel took and that I took. I am so deeply moved to be here today. For those who bear the wounds of war, cherish the blessings of peace. I remembered my brother who died saving Israeli and Jewish hostages in the heart of Africa. This was the culmination of a decades-old effort to establish Israel's security, its prominence as a strong and independent country, and as a strong ally of the United States. It just vindicated everything that we had said, everything that I had said just exactly 4 years earlier at the United Nations. I said, there's peace to be had. The Arab countries are waiting for it. And I knew that this was significant not only for that moment, but I think for many generations to come.
Former Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Bibi Netanyahu, who is one of today's monumental leaders, takes us on an extraordinary journey in his memoir of purpose, destiny, history, and family. Explore the landscape of Benjamin's life and legacy. From a child, son, brother, soldier, and commander, to an astounding political figure with a mission to protect, unite, and bring liberty and justice to Israel and nations around the world. Netanyahu takes a personal, dramatic, riveting, and detailed account of his life and aspirations. He shares testimonies about his strong Zionist family upbringing, alongside stories of his close-knit brothers Yoni and Edo. He recounts his negotiations and relationships with presidents of our modern history in an eye-opening, heartfelt expression of truth and passion. The memoir of this insightful, formidable leader of our time will stand as an inspiring, defining testament of courage, conviction, and strength. This is Bibi, My Story. Call or go online to get your copy today.
Benjamin Netanyahu, we're sitting talking about your new autobiography, Bibi, My Story. Let me ask you just briefly, one of the times that I had the opportunity to be with you was in Uganda, and you write an extensive piece in your book about your brother. You both served in elite units, and the story of Yanni is a big piece of who and what your family is, and specifically you.
There's no question that the death of my brother in the historic Entebbe rescue, which was named after him, Operation Jonathan. His name was Jonathan, Yoni in the diminutive. That steered me to the present course of my life. He was wounded. He was a soldier in the paratroops. He was wounded in the last 3 hours of the Six-Day Wars. I was very happy to see that he didn't die, but that he was disabled. So I had this premonition that he would die in a war.
My goodness.
Now he's 21 years old, I'm 18 years old, about to enter the army. He's just been in a war. And, you know, I see him in the hospital bed in Safed in the Galilee, surrounded by amputee soldiers. And his elbow is whole, but he's disabled. So I'm very happy.
Wow.
Oh, I'm very happy because he's going to live, and he's not going to be in the military anymore. And sure enough, he goes to Harvard, gets accepted there, he gets to Walter Reed, he's hospital, you know, he's operated on by fine American doctors, but, you know, he's not going to go to serve in the Army anymore, so I'm fine. But now I'm in the Army, okay? I'm in the Army in this special unit, our elite unit. It's called Sayeret Matkal. And very early on, the commander of this unit, who was to later die in a rescue of terrorists here in Tel Aviv Beach, but at the time he was a very impetuous guy. And he calls me and he says, you're going to officer school. And I said, well, I'm not. Why aren't you going? I said, because it means serving another 2 years after my 3 years regular service, and I've been accepted to Yale University, and I'm going to Yale University. He said, well, you have a weekend to think about it. If you come here after the weekend and you don't give me a yes, I'm throwing you out of the unit. It's either officer school or out. Well, I thought, well, what am I going to do? So I went back to talk to my older brother, my disabled veteran brother, Yoni. And I said, this guy, the commander, Uzi Yairi, his name was, Uzi, he said, he's going to throw me out of the unit. What should I tell him? And he thought for a moment. And he said, tell him I'll take your place.
Oh my goodness.
And I said, you're old. He was all of 23, right? You're married, okay. And anyway, you're a disabled veteran. How could he take you into a special unit to be a commander of a special team? And he said, just tell him to pull my file. So I come back after the weekend, and Uzi Yairi says to me, well, have you decided? And I said, yeah, I'm not going, but my brother is willing to come in my place. He said, who's your brother? I said, his name is Yoni. Pull his file. Pulled his file. He saw outstanding cadet in officer school, superlatives by all his officers. He said, okay, we'll bring him in. Now they had a problem. he was disabled. I mean, he couldn't do this. He could do, his elbow wasn't that fixed yet. But he wanted him very badly. So they brought him to the induction center, the Army's induction center. And they were lucky to have an immigrant doctor from France. And he mistook the word elbow joint, really, for the word elbow for the word joint. And he looked at one of Yoni's knees, said, looks okay. And he got him into the Army. So now Yoni took my place and he became an officer in the unit.
My goodness.
But a year later, I changed my mind and I decided that I'd be an officer, I'd go to officer school too. So we were now both officers in the unit. And I completed my service after 5 years and went to study, I have to say not at Yale, but at MIT. And he stayed in the Army and rose to the command of this unit and took his soldiers to the legendary rescue at Entebbe, where he was the only military casualty, where they rescued 103 Jewish hostages in the heart of Entebbe, and he fell while leading his men in storming the terrorists. They liberated the hostages, killed the terrorists, 2 Germans and 2 Palestinians, and all the Ugandan troops who were aiding them, brought the hostages back to Israel in what Drew Middleton of the New York Times, their analyst, said was a raid unprecedented in modern times. It's true, and Yoni had a lot to do with it, and I described this extraordinary rescue. But obviously, when he fell, I was already a student at MIT. I thought my life was over. Not only the extent of the loss, but also because of, which was inexpressible. I had to tell my parents. My father was teaching at Cornell University in Ithaca, New York at the time. And I went to tell my parents, which was something I describe in the book, but it's actually worse than hearing about Yoni's death, if you can believe it. But that was, as far as I was concerned, the end of my life, because I also had hopes that he would rise in the ranks and that as long as he was there, Israel would be protected. Now he was gone, and it was just impossible to describe the collapse. And what I describe in the book is how I emerged from this inconsolable grief to first lead a battle against international terrorism, and then enter the Israeli political world and become Israel's longest serving prime minister with a view of protecting our future and securing our destiny.
You were able to allow the miracle of Israel and its rebirth to rebirth yourself.
Yeah.
The hope that you described, that Israel is a parable of hope. It's a parable of faith.
Yeah.
You rose from the, in essence, ashes yourself to lead this great nation to where it is.
That's very perceptive. I didn't think that I would be able to do that at the time. During the Shiva, the 7 days of mourning, I had lost my sense of taste.
My goodness.
I was deep shock, deep sense of hopelessness. And then something happened in my military service. I almost drowned in a firefight in the Suez Canal. Almost drowned. I had to jumped into the water. The Egyptians were raiding the Israeli side of the canal.
Yeah.
Remember, we didn't have peace at that time. And the army decided to send my unit to the other side of the canal to hit back. So we did. We crossed on rubber boats, passed, attacked an Egyptian convoy, came back. It's not a pleasant thing, I'd describe it, but it's war. they were elated. They said, do it again. And I said, well, it's kind of close. I mean, we just did that. They might wait for us. Well, the second crossing, they did wait for us. And this is at night, we're crossing with the boats, all right? And they opened fire on us from these foxholes that they dug every 50 meters. And the bullets are just whizzing around us. The first hail of bullets hit one of my fellow soldiers, who was an exceptional guy, and he fell in the water, and we had to look for him days later. But all these bullets are whizzing around. I don't know if you see these movies like Normandy landing, right? Saving Private Ryan, same thing. Yeah. It's whizzing around and the bullets are in the water, but I thought we'd have a better chance if we're in the water, that we'd be protected. And the boat would continue to be rolling to the Israeli side. Well, I forgot when I jumped in that I was carrying a gunner's ammo pack of about 40 pounds on my back, and they were strapped for combat. So even though I inflated the life vest, it was only half inflated, and I began to sink. Now I'm sinking, I'm drowning. I'm going down to the bottom of the Suez Canal, okay? And with the remainder of strength that I had, I kicked myself up, gulped some air, went down again, and somebody, as my head is in the water, grabbed my hand, right? And grabbed my hand and pulled me up. I never knew who it was because there was a big argument who did it. My head was underwater, so I thanked everyone who claimed it.
Wow.
Claimed to have done that. And brought me to the other side of the canal, and somehow survived. I felt during the days after Yoni's death, after Yoni's funeral, that I was drowning.
Wow.
And then somebody lurched out with a hand, and that somebody was actually a letter that was brought by a woman. She was 30 years old. She had been married to one of Yoni's friends who had died. And she had kept this letter that Yoni had written at the age of 17, 13 years earlier, to her late husband. And soon we started receiving letters from people whom Yoni wrote to because he expressed his soul in his letters. Remember, this is pre-digital age. That's how you communicated. And so we assembled in a very short time, we assembled a few hundred of his letters, which was actually himself describing his life from the age of 17 until a few days before his fall at Entebbe. And we published it. And it became a very big sensation, a source of inspiration for decades of young Israelis. But that pulled me out of the water, okay? So I had a purpose. But then we said there's a larger purpose here, because it's true Yoni died in the battle against terrorism. But he didn't think that it was just a military battle. He thought it was a moral battle.
Wow.
Of free civilization against barbarians who broke every norm, every civilized norm, blow up children to smithereens in a bus, who deliberately target cities. So we thought that the way to change this, the explosion of terrorism that shook the world, was to harness the free societies for a different position against terrorism. They were all making their separate deals, trying to cut their separate deals with these or that terrorists, and said, no, terrorism is international, it has to be fought internationally, and we have to go after them. Go after the states that sponsor terrorism, and go after them economically, diplomatically, and if necessary, militarily. And so I organized some international conferences for that effect at the anniversary of Yoni's fall at Entebbe, and that reverberated, that got me into politics, and then the rest is where we've talked about it. But the main thing was that my emergence from ashes, as you call it, or from the depth of the abyss of despair came from understanding that there is a purpose out there that I have to serve. And that purpose was to protect the Jewish state, which is the key to the survival of the Jewish people, but also to protect freedom. And that requires getting out of the abyss. And that's how I climbed up.
In our world, what we would say is God has chosen you to be in the position you are to protect this land. And it's a calling. That's the way an evangelical would say to you, you're called to protect this land. You are personally an analogy of what the state of Israel is. You used the miracle of Israel to rebuild yourself, and you're protecting that for others, for the next generation. And we recognize that very easily. We're in support of Israel, but we're in support of you because of those things. You've given me more insight as to who you are, and I have one final question, because I am asking now Prime Minister Netanyahu, elected now for the 6th time, day one of your 6th term as Prime Minister, what do you need to accomplish for the future of Israel and on behalf of the state?
Well, the first three things are easy. Block Iran, block Iran, block Iran. The fourth is a fifth peace treaty, which I believe we can have. And I think the best candidate and the most important one is Saudi Arabia, which effectively ends the Arab-Israeli conflict, the broader Arab-Israeli conflict, and creates a tremendous prospect for peace. The next thing is to unleash the enormous potential here for certain areas of technology. I won't bore you with this, but I think we can do incredible things. We just did that with COVID. We were the first country to emerge from COVID because we had a data bank of the medical records, anonymous by the way, but statistically very significant, of 98% of the Israeli citizenry, right? So that's what I told Albert Bourla of Pfizer here. You can find out if your thing works because we have you can find out if diabetes patients can take your vaccine or not, and what effects would it have, and so on. So now we have another database that we can have. If you'll volunteer to give me your saliva, and we couple these two databases, we have an enormous thing that no other country has. So there are 5, 6 big areas like that. That is just tremendous innovation. And you know what the other thing is? Change the Israeli political system. Because we can't go on having these elections.
Please.
So I have my hands full. But if you ask me what is the one reason why I'm coming back to a life of politics, which is very hard in Israel. It's very cruel and it's unforgiving. Even though I'm very grateful to the support of millions in Israel and outside Israel for helping me go through the pitfalls and the great sacrifice that politics involved. The one reason that I'm going back into the storm, the one reason is Iran. Because other things can be fixed. There eventually have to be other leaders who come to the fore, and there will be. And one hopes that they're capable and visionary and purposeful. But my purpose is to prevent the one thing that could scuttle the ship, and that's Iran, a nuclear Iran. And that is something that I think is not only important for our future, but for yours as well. So that's the reason I'm going in. And if I had to summarize, Matt, what I would say to those who in your audience who I think live their lives, understand that it's not just a day-to-day thing. They seek a life of purpose. I can say that I've lived a life of purpose. And my purpose is to protect the future of the Jewish people, but also the future of freedom to the extent that I can affect it. And I think anybody who's interested in living a life of purpose should read this book.
Benjamin Netanyahu, Bibi, my story. Wow. There are more people praying for you than you can imagine. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, our audience loves Israel. They love you. They love what you're doing. And we appreciate everything. And
Well,
thank you for
and I deeply, deeply appreciate the support of Christians. Christian Zionism made Jewish Zionism possible. That's another part of the story which I described in my book.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hey, I'm Mati Shoshani, and thank you for watching the TBN Israel YouTube channel. We hope this video gave you greater understanding of Israel and her people. If you haven't already, subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a video. We'd love to hear from you, so be sure to share what you've learned and ask your questions and comments below. And invite your friends to join the conversation.